Before we dive into this wild ride, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Whether it's a quiet cul-de-sac in Arizona, a busy apartment block in New York, or a peaceful lakeside cabin up in Minnesota. I love hearing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma can travel. The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned onto the narrow road that led to my lake cabin. The sun was dipping low, throwing a gold shimmer across the water, the kind of evening I had been craving after a long week. Solitude. Silence. A night by the lake with nothing but the sound of crickets and the soft lap of waves against the dock. That was what I expected. But halfway down the winding path, something felt off. I could hear music long before I saw the cabin. Loud, thumping bass that didn't belong here. Then came the smell of grilled meat and beer, so strong it poured through my open windows. When the trees opened up and the cabin came into view, my stomach dropped. Cars, dozens of them, lined both sides of the road and spilled across the grass. Pickup trucks, SUVs, even a couple of rented party vans. The gate I had locked the weekend before stood wide open, one hinge bent and sagging as if it had been forced. My driveway was no longer mine. It looked like a fairground parking lot. Beyond the vehicles, clusters of strangers lounged in camping chairs, laughing, red plastic cups in hand. My dock was crowded with people in swimsuits, splashing into the lake as though it were a public pool. I killed the engine and sat frozen for a moment, my hands clenching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't some mistake. This wasn't kids trespassing for a quick swim. This was organized. It looked like someone had invited the entire neighborhood. I stepped out, the smell of spilled beer immediately souring in my nose, and started toward the cabin. A man I'd never seen before carried a keg past me as if I didn't exist. When I stopped him and asked what was going on, he just grinned and said, "You late, man? Don't worry, plenty of burgers left." Then he disappeared into the crowd before I could reply. Every muscle in my body tightened. I walked faster, scanning faces, trying to understand. Children darted between tables of food. A group of teenagers shouted from the roof of my shed as they hurled water balloons toward the dock. And there, standing near the cabin porch, were two figures I recognized instantly, Susan and Nancy. The sisters were impossible to miss. Both were dressed as though they had mistaken a backyard barbecue for a fashion show. Susan wore a floral summer dress stretched too tight under a cream cardigan, her hair pinned back with oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Nancy had on a bright green blouse tucked awkwardly into dark pants, her arms folded across her chest, lips curled into a smirk. They weren't guests. They were hosts. I marched straight toward them, anger pounding in my chest. What the hell is going on here? My voice cut through the laughter closest to us, but Susan didn't even flinch. "Oh, look who finally decided to show up," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "We were wondering when you'd get here." Nancy gave me a once-over and shook her head, as if I were the intruder. "Relax. We're just using the space for a little community gathering. Everyone's having a good time. You should too." "My cabin," I snapped. "My property. None of you should be here." Susan's eyes narrowed, but her smile stayed plastered in place. "Don't be dramatic. It's just one weekend. People need somewhere to celebrate, and this cabin has been sitting empty most of the year. We thought it would be nice to open it up." "You broke my gate," I shot back, pointing toward the road. "That isn't opening it up. That's trespassing." Nancy waved a dismissive hand. "Details, details. You're part of this neighborhood, right? That makes you part of the HOA, which means technically this place is part of our community resources. We're just making use of it." I actually laughed, though it came out more like a growl. "That is not how property law works. You don't get to declare my cabin a community center." Susan leaned closer, lowering her voice as though she were offering friendly advice. "Don't be so uptight. You could win some friends here. People think you're a little standoffish. This could be good for you." Behind her, a cheer went up as someone popped open another case of beer. My furniture I had chosen carefully for quiet evenings, was being dragged out onto the grass for strangers to sit on. A child smeared ketchup across the arm of my deck chair while his parents laughed, oblivious. I turned back to the sisters, my jaw clenched. Everyone leaves. Now. Or I'm calling the police. Nancy actually chuckled. Oh, honey, don't embarrass yourself. You really think the cops are going to come out here and kick 100 people off a property when the HOA already approved the event? They did not approve, I started, but she cut me off with a sharp laugh. They approved when we said they did, she said. Susan tilted her head, looking at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Just let it go. One weekend. By Sunday night, you'll have your precious little cabin back, and nobody gets upset. A man passing by overheard and chimed in, Yeah, dude, lighten up. We're just having fun. His friends laughed, raising their cups in mock toasts. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to drag them all out myself, to throw Susan and Nancy into the dirt and lock the gate behind them. But looking around, I knew I couldn't. I was outnumbered 100 to 1. Some of the men were already giving me challenging stares, the kind that dared me to push things further. I swallowed my anger and pulled a folder from my truck, my deed, property tax receipts, all of it. I held the papers up in Susan's face. This is mine. Every inch of it. You're trespassing, and I have proof. She laughed, a shrill sound that cut through the evening noise. Nobody here cares about your little stack of papers. You think waving documents around is going to stop us from enjoying ourselves. Nancy smirked, raising her voice so the crowd could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, the party crasher has arrived. Our gracious host thinks his paperwork is more important than your good time. Laughter rippled through the group. Someone whistled. A drunk man shouted, Boo! Go home, lawyer boy. Heat burned my face. I wanted to scream. But as the crowd jeered, I realized something. I wasn't going to win this fight tonight. Not here, not surrounded by strangers emboldened by alcohol and Susan and Nancy's arrogance. If I stayed, it would only get worse. So I lowered the papers slowly, slid them back into the folder, and turned without another word. Their laughter followed me as I walked across the lawn, every step heavier than the last. Behind me, music blared louder, as though they were celebrating my retreat. I climbed into my truck, slammed the door, and sat in the dark cab for a long moment. My hands shook on the steering wheel. The rage inside me was molten, almost too much to contain. They thought they had won. They thought I would roll over, let them desecrate my home. As I started the engine, headlights sweeping across the lawn, Susan's voice cut through the noise. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll leave you a burger. The crowd erupted in laughter again. I gritted my teeth, forced myself to stay calm, and pulled away from the cabin. The gravel crunched under my tires as I disappeared down the road, their laughter fading behind me. They believed I was powerless. But as the gate came into view, broken, dangling uselessly from one hinge, I tightened my grip on the wheel. This wasn't over. Not even close. I barely slept that night. The motel room was quiet, but my head wasn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Susan and Nancy's smug faces, heard their mocking laughter, and smelled the sour mix of beer and smoke rising from my cabin. I imagined the lake water clogged with trash, my furniture stained, my walls punched through by careless fists. Anger gnawed at me, but under it was something sharper, a resolve. They thought I was outnumbered, humiliated, powerless. They were wrong. At dawn, I got back in my truck and drove toward the lake. My stomach churned with dread, but I had to see the damage for myself. As I approached the cabin road, the bass of music thumped through the trees, even louder than before. The air was heavy with the scent of fireworks and grease. When I pulled closer, my worst fears crystallized into reality. My once pristine yard looked like a carnival had exploded on it. Empty bottles lay crushed in the grass. Charcoal smoke drifted lazily from grills set up on the driveway. A group of half-drunk teenagers had tied a rope to one of my trees and were swinging each other recklessly over the slope. The lake itself, usually a clear mirror of the morning sky, was streaked with oil and beer cans bobbing in the ripples. My dock sagged under the weight of a dozen people, some dangling their feet in the water, others blasting music from portable speakers. And then I saw the sisters again. Susan stood at the porch steps, one hand on her hip, the other holding a megaphone like some self-appointed mayor. Nancy was beside her, barking orders to people moving folding tables loaded with food. They looked proud, basking in their stolen authority, as though this chaos was some triumph of their leadership. I parked on the road and didn't bother confronting them. Not this time. Instead, I took out my phone and began filming. Every detail mattered. The crowd trespassing, the children running wild, the guests urinating by the tree line. I zoomed in on the broken gate, its hinge ripped away, then panned to the sisters orchestrating their so-called community event. Susan noticed me. She lifted the megaphone and sneered. "Look, everyone. He's filming his little documentary. Maybe Netflix will pick it up." Laughter rippled through the crowd. But I didn't react. I just kept filming, steady and silent, letting the evidence pile up. After 10 minutes, I got back into my truck and drove away, their voices fading behind me. For now, I needed distance. But as I drove into town, an idea began to form, a plan that wasn't about arguing or begging. If Susan and Nancy wanted spectacle, I would give them one. But it would be on my terms. At the hardware store, I bought what I needed: heavy-duty steel panels, industrial-grade locks, and new hinges built for security gates. I called a local welder I trusted and explained the situation. He laughed grimly, said he'd seen neighbors like that before, and agreed to come out by afternoon. By noon, we had a truckload of materials heading back to the cabin road. While the welder worked, sparks flying in sharp bursts, I stood guard, watching the property from a distance. None of the partygoers paid attention. They were too busy drinking, swimming, and dancing. Susan and Nancy strutted about like queens of the lake, oblivious to what was happening just beyond the road. The welder replaced the ruined gate with a reinforced steel one, high and impenetrable, with a lock that could be secured from both sides. By the time he was done, the road in and out of my cabin was no longer an open door. It was a trap waiting to close. Evening settled in, painting the lake with streaks of orange and purple. Music blared louder as the crowd swelled. More cars had arrived, squeezing onto the shoulder. Fireworks cracked in the twilight, illegal and reckless, sending sparks over the water. My fury deepened, but so did my focus. I parked just out of sight, watching from a shaded bend in the road. I could hear shouts of celebration echo across the water, the sisters leading chants with smug bravado. At 9 o'clock, when the party was at full tilt, I acted. I drove back toward the gate, positioned my truck across the entrance, and slid the heavy lock into place. The clank of steel echoed in the night. The reinforced bars glinted under my headlights. Nobody was leaving unless I let them. It took nearly half an hour before someone tried. A car rolled slowly toward the gate, headlights flashing. When the driver saw the barrier, he honked impatiently. The noise drew more attention. Soon a small crowd gathered, muttering, tugging at the gate. Realization spread like a cold ripple through the mob. From my vantage point, I saw Susan and Nancy push through the crowd. Susan's cardigan flapped as she stormed forward, her face flushed with irritation. Nancy's green blouse was stained with sweat, her arms flailing as she demanded space. They rattled the gate furiously, then spun around to face their guests. Everyone calmed down. Susan barked through the megaphone, though her voice cracked under the pressure. It's just a little glitch. We'll get it open." But panic was already brewing. A man shouted that he had work in the morning. A mother demanded to take her kids home. Someone cursed about their car being trapped. The sisters snapped at them, insisting it was under control, but the more they shouted, the clearer it became. They had no control at all. I stepped forward then, my headlights washing across their faces. The entire mob turned toward me. For a moment, silence blanketed the chaos. Then Susan's voice rang out, shrill and desperate. You can't just lock people in here. This is illegal." I didn't answer. I simply raised my phone, showing the glowing screen as it recorded every frantic face, every demand, every ounce of fear. My silence spoke louder than words. The crowd began to splinter. Arguments broke out. Guests turned on the sisters, accusing them of lying about having permission, demanding answers they couldn't provide. Nancy shouted back, but her voice was drowned in the rising wave of anger. Susan tried to laugh it off, but her eyes darted nervously to the gate, to me, to the dozens of people who were now glaring at her. Inside my chest, the molten anger I had carried since last night began to cool, not into forgiveness, but into something sharper, more satisfying. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I dialed the sheriff's office, my phone glowing in the night. When the dispatcher answered, I kept my voice steady. This is private property. I have over 100 trespassers locked inside. I have video evidence of damage, forced entry, and harassment. Send units immediately. I ended the call and slid the phone into my pocket. Then I leaned against the hood of my truck, folding my arms, and waited. The crowd was restless, the sisters desperate, the tension thick enough to choke on. They had no idea how much worse it was about to get. And as the first wail of sirens began to echo faintly through the trees, the sisters' bravado finally cracked. For the first time all weekend, I saw fear flash across their faces. It was only the beginning. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees, washing across the metal gate like fire. The music inside the property faltered as people noticed the sirens closing in. Voices shifted from drunken cheer to worried murmurs. Engines rumbled to life as partygoers scrambled to their cars, but the gate held fast, their way out blocked. The first patrol car rolled up, followed by two more, their lights bouncing off the lake water. The sheriff himself stepped out, a tall man with a stern jaw, his boots crunching on gravel. He didn't need to speak for the mob to fall into a tense hush. All eyes shifted between him and the sisters, whose confident masks were slipping fast. Susan shoved through the crowd, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder. She raised her arms, trying to sound authoritative. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man locked innocent families inside. He's gone mad." Her voice cracked with urgency, but the sheriff didn't look at her. He looked at me. I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, and handed him my phone. The screen glowed with the videos I had recorded. The broken gate, the overflowing trash, the guests vandalizing property, the sisters orchestrating it all like ringleaders. The sheriff scrolled silently, his expression unreadable. The only sound was the restless shifting of 100 people behind the fence. When he finally looked up, his voice was flat. "This your property?" "Yes, sir. Deeds in my glove box, if you need to see it. I never gave anyone permission to be here. The gate was forced open yesterday. These people were told this was a community event." I paused, letting my gaze cut toward the sisters. "By them." Gasps and angry mutters rippled through the crowd. A man in a baseball cap jabbed a finger at Susan. "You told us this was HOA approved. You said it was legal." Nancy's voice cracked as she shouted back, "It was. I mean, it is. We have the authority." But her words were drowned out by a woman clutching a child at her hip. "You lied to us. You dragged our families into this mess." The sheriff raised a hand for silence. "Everyone listen carefully. You are trespassing on private property. You're going to leave calmly and without further damage. But first," he turned to his deputies. "Get those two." Susan's face drained of color as a deputy stepped forward. "Wait. You can't arrest us. We were doing this for the community." She struggled as handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Nancy shrieked, twisting against the officer who restrained her, her blouse ripping at the shoulder. The crowd watched, stunned, as the sisters were marched toward the patrol cars, their shrill protests echoing into the night. The mob scattered in waves after that. Some muttered apologies as they hurried past me, avoiding eye contact. Others cursed under their breath, slamming their car doors in frustration. A few hurled angry words at the sisters, blaming them for everything. The chaos unraveled quickly, headlights flickering on as engines revved and tires spun out onto the road. By midnight, the property was nearly empty. Trash littered the grass, the lake was clouded with debris, and my once serene yard looked like the aftermath of a festival. But it was mine again. The gate was locked, the night was quiet except for the chirp of crickets, and Susan and Nancy were nowhere to be seen except in the back of squad cars. The sheriff returned my phone. "You did the right thing. This evidence will hold up." His tone softened slightly, almost amused. "Smart move with that gate. Most folks would have tried to fight a mob head-on. You boxed them in instead." I nodded, exhaustion finally pressing down on me. They thought they could walk all over me. Not anymore. He tipped his hat, then left me standing in the glow of my truck's headlights, alone with the wreckage. The following weeks were a parade of consequences for the sisters. The HOA distanced itself immediately, denying any approval and suspending their membership. Word spread fast through the neighborhood. The women who had once strutted about like queens of the block became outcasts overnight. Neighbors whispered about the charges: trespassing, destruction of property, reckless endangerment. The fines alone climbed into the thousands. I rebuilt slowly. The dock was scrubbed clean, the furniture repaired, the lawn restored. The lake took longer to heal, but with time and care, the water cleared. I installed new cameras at every angle of the property and reinforced the gate again, this time with motion sensors. No one would ever force their way in without me knowing. One evening, a month after the incident, I was driving back from town when I spotted a familiar sight on the roadside. Susan and Nancy stood beside their old SUV, hood popped, steam rising from the engine. Their clothes were disheveled. Their hair clung to their foreheads with sweat, and their faces were twisted in frustration as they argued with each other. I slowed as I approached, our eyes meeting for a brief, electric moment. Susan opened her mouth as if to shout something, but I pressed the gas and rolled past them without a word. In my rear-view mirror, their figures shrank against the fading light, helpless and stranded. A sharp satisfaction settled over me. They had tried to trap me in humiliation, to claim what wasn't theirs. But in the end, they were the ones left standing on the roadside, powerless, forgotten, and small. Back at the cabin, I stood on the porch and looked out over the lake. The water was calm again, reflecting the stars. The air smelled of pine and earth, not beer or smoke. It was as though the place itself had exhaled after holding its breath. I leaned on the railing, the cool wood under my palms, and let the silence sink in. For the first time in weeks, it was truly mine again. Entitlement has a way of convincing people they're untouchable, that rules don't apply to them. Susan and Nancy believed that so fully, they invited 100 strangers into my life without a second thought. But arrogance always leaves cracks, and when justice finally seeps through, it doesn't trickle, it floods. I smiled to myself, the lake glittering under the moonlight. They had thought they owned my weekend. They had thought they owned me. But the gate had shut, the law had spoken, and karma had finished the story for me. And as I turned to step inside, the quiet cabin waiting, I knew one thing for certain. They would never forget the night the lake stopped belonging to them. And that's how two arrogant sisters learned the hard way that no one is above the law, and that sometimes the sweetest revenge is just letting karma do its job. My cabin is finally peaceful again. The lake is mine, and their reputation? Shattered for good. If you enjoyed this story of justice served and want to hear more outrageous tales of entitlement getting crushed, make sure to like, drop a comment with your thoughts, share it with friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Your support keeps these stories coming.